Now tell me, you ever seen something so wrong it makes your teeth ache? Not a big, loud wrongness that announces itself with trumpets and flags, but a quiet, creeping kind of evil. The kind that leaves a person tied to a juniper tree in the middle of the lava beds, with a dirty blindfold over their eyes and the sun tasked to finish the job. That's where he found her. Cale, a man who had made a treaty with silence long ago, was tracking a ghost cat through the obsidian flows when he saw her. A smudge of color against the black rock. He moved with a stillness that the land itself had taught him, his moccasins making no sound. He saw the coarse rope biting into her wrists, the tremble in her frame that wasn't from cold, but from a spirit stretched to its breaking point. He knelt, pulled a knife sharp enough to shave the moonlight, and with 2 swift motions, she was free. The ropes fell away like dead snakes. Her hands, when they came up to her face, were shaking. "Please, just stay calm," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp of dust and fear. He didn't reply. Instead, Cale, the last chief of a scattered people, reached out and gently, so gently, untied her blindfold. And then he froze. It wasn't just the exhaustion in her eyes, or the map of suffering drawn on her face. It was the mark. A brand, seared into the tender skin of her forearm. The curling seed of the Croft cattle empire. A mark of ownership? And Cale knew right then that this wasn't an ending he'd stumbled upon. It was a beginning. And it was going to be paid for in blood or bedrock. He gave her no words. Words were for traders and politicians, things that had failed his people. He gave her water from his deerskin flask, a silent offering. She drank like a person coming back from the dead, her throat working hard to swallow. He gestured with his head, a single, sharp command to follow. And she did. She stumbled, her legs unaccustomed to freedom, but she followed him through the maze of volcanic rock and shadow. This was his home, a place of broken ground and bitter memory, a fortress carved by the earth's fire where no one dared to venture. He led her into a fissure, a deep cut in the land that opened into a cool, dark cave. It was a home of sorts. A bed of soft fir boughs in one corner, a fire pit cold in the center, the walls painted with the charcoal stories of his ancestors. He pointed to the bed. A clear, simple instruction. Rest. He then turned his back, affording her the dignity of privacy, and stared out at the unforgiving landscape that was his only companion. The silence in that cave wasn't empty. It had a pulse. It was the sound of 2 broken things, sitting in the same space, wondering if they could ever be made whole again. And you have to wonder, don't you? How much can a person endure before they either shatter or turn to iron? He was about to find out. The days that followed were measured in silence and small gestures. He would leave a bowl of rabbit stew by her sleeping place and be gone when she awoke. He'd return to find the bowl cleaned and a small, perfectly shaped obsidian arrowhead left in its place. A thank you. A trade. An acknowledgement. He watched her from a distance as she began to heal. The first day, she did not move from the fir boughs. The second, she walked to the mouth of the cave, her silhouette framed against the harsh light. The third, he found her mending a tear in his buckskin shirt with a piece of sinew, her stitches small and neat. An act of creation in a place of destruction. He never asked her name. He never asked what happened. The brand on her arm was a story loud enough. It spoke of a man named Silas Croft, a rancher who believed the world and everyone in it was his to claim, his to mark, his to discard. Cale had seen Croft's greed swallow up homesteads and water rights, watched him drive good people from their land with hired guns and a wolf smile. He had watched the local townspeople, the fickle community, turn a blind eye, their silence bought with fear or a few silver dollars. Now, that greed had washed up at the shore of his solitude. One afternoon, as a storm gathered on the horizon, pressing down with a heavy, humid hand, she spoke. He was chipping a new flint point, the rhythmic tick, tick, tick the only sound. "Elara," she said. Her voice was stronger now, like a river regaining its current after a long drought. He paused, his hand still. He looked at her. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Cale," he replied. It was the first word he'd spoken to her. An exchange. A bridge built across the chasm of their private griefs. She held up the mended shirt. The stitching was a fine, pale scar on the worn leather. It looked stronger than the original. A symbol, if you believe in such things. It was a promise that what is broken can be repaired, not to be what it was before, but to be something new. Something stronger. She then looked at the brand on her own arm, her jaw set. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a cold fire that matched the lightning beginning to flicker in the distant, bruised clouds. She didn't have to say a word. He knew what was coming. Trouble doesn't just go away. It has to be met. It has to be answered. And the sound of that answer was already on the wind. It didn't come as a whisper. It came as a drumbeat. The sound of shod horses on hard-packed earth, a sound that didn't belong in these sacred, broken lands. Clip-clop. Clip-clop. Heavy. Arrogant. Cale rose to his feet, every line of his body tense, a predator scenting a rival. He grabbed his bow, not with haste, but with a deliberate economy of motion that spoke of 1,000 such moments. Ilara stood behind him, her hand not trembling, but resting on a heavy piece of firewood. The sound grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls until it was right outside the cave. 3 figures on horseback appeared, their shapes dark against the bruised, stormy sky. In the lead was Silas Croft, a big man with a face like spoiled meat, flushed with arrogance. He smiled like a snake about to strike. Well, well, Croft's voice was like gravel and oil. Look what the savage has dragged into his den. He spat on the ground, a glob of brown tobacco juice staining the black rock. I've come for my property. His 2 hired guns, boys trying to look like men, shifted nervously in their saddles, their hands hovering near their pistols. They were the weak-willed cronies that power always gathers to itself, the kind that do the dirty work and ask no questions. Cale didn't move a muscle. He stood like a stone monument, an extension of the ancient lava rock around him. His eyes were fixed on Croft, dark and unreadable. He had faced men like this before, men whose hearts were shriveled with want. They were hollow. Easy to break. She's not going anywhere, Cale said. The words were flat. Not a request, not a debate. A statement of fact. As final as a gravestone. Croft laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that the rocks threw back at him. Is that so? This is my land. She is my runaway servant. The law is on my side. He gestured with his chin to one of his men. Go on, boy. Fetch her. The hired gun, a young man with fear swimming behind his eyes, dismounted. He took one hesitant step toward the cave. Then another. The air grew thick, so heavy you could taste the ozone from the coming storm. This was the moment. The pivot on which a life, or 2 lives, would turn. You've been there, haven't you? That moment where you have to choose between the easy wrong and the hard right. What do you do? What does a good man do when evil comes knocking at his door? Just as the hired gun reached the shadow of the cave's entrance, a new voice cut through the tension. Clear. Cold. Unbreakable. I am not his servant. Ilara stepped forward, moving from behind Cale's protective form. She was no longer a victim. Her shoulders were squared, her chin high. In her hand, she held not the piece of firewood, but a rolled-up piece of oilskin she'd kept hidden in her boot. And this is not your land. She unfurled it. Even from a distance, the official seal of the territorial government was visible. This is my homestead claim, she declared, her voice ringing with the truth. Filed and approved 3 months ago. My father's, passed to me. You, Silas Croft, tried to scare me off. When that didn't work, you and your men left me to die, so you could file a fraudulent claim over mine. She looked past Croft, directly at his 2 men. He lied to you. He told you I was a thief. He is the thief. He is the would-be murderer. The hired guns froze. Their eyes flickered from the deed, to Croft's now purple face, to Ilara's unyielding gaze. They saw the truth. and their loyalty, built on nothing more than pay and fear, began to crumble like dry dirt. Humiliation is a powerful poison. Croft's face contorted in a mask of pure rage. The lie was exposed. His power was an illusion. With a guttural roar, he lunged, not at Elara, but at Cale, pulling his pistol. But he was a clumsy rancher, driven by fury. Cale was a warrior, driven by purpose. He moved like smoke. A blur of motion. He didn't meet the attack head-on. He sidestepped, his hand shooting out to lock onto Croft's wrist. There was a sharp crack of bone. The pistol clattered onto the rocks. Croft screamed, a high, thin sound of pain and shock. Cale didn't strike him again. He simply held him there, the big man brought low, cradling his broken hand. The two hired guns looked at each other, then at their defeated boss. Without a word, they turned their horses and rode away, vanishing back the way they came, leaving their master to his shame. The fickle community had chosen a new side, the side of survival. Cale released Croft, pushing him back. "Go," he said, the single word carrying the weight of a final judgment. Silas Croft stumbled away, a broken, pathetic figure, swallowed by the vast and indifferent landscape he had tried to conquer. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, washing the dust and the hate from the air. As the rain turned from a sprinkle to a downpour, a cleansing torrent that washed the world clean, they stood in the mouth of the cave. The storm that had threatened was finally breaking, and it felt less like a tempest and more like a baptism. The immediate threat was gone, receded like a foul tide, leaving behind a hard-won, fragile peace. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They watched the lightning dance across the sky, illuminating the stark, beautiful country that had nearly killed one of them and saved them both. In the quiet aftermath, a new kind of silence settled between them. It wasn't the silence of pain or uncertainty anymore. It was the silence of shared victory. Of mutual respect. It was the solid, foundational silence on which you could build a home. That night, she tended to the scrapes on his knuckles from Croft's pistol, and he laid a warm blanket over her shoulders. Small acts of care. The quiet language of a shared future. The world outside was still full of cruel and greedy men, of fickle towns and silent bystanders. But in that cave, carved from the fire of the earth, two survivors had drawn a line. They had found their strength not in violence, but in defiance. Not in words, but in action. In the days and weeks that followed, they built a life. They found a small patch of earth in a sheltered basin where centuries of dust had collected, and they planted a garden. Corn, squash, and beans. The three sisters. A symbol of a life lived in balance. He taught her the language of the rocks and the sky. She taught him how to laugh again, a low, quiet sound at first, that slowly grew to fill the space between them. The brand on her arm faded to a faint, white scar, no longer a mark of ownership but a reminder of her own resilience. They were no longer the stoic protector and the resilient survivor. They were Cale and Elara. A new beginning, planted in the rubble of the old. And isn't that the lesson we're all here to learn? That the deepest wounds can heal. That true strength isn't about the power you wield over others, but the courage you find to protect one another. It's the quiet resolve to plant a garden in a wasteland. To build a home in the heart of a storm. If this story stirred something in you, something about the power of standing your ground and the quiet dignity of human resilience, then carry that feeling with you today. Find your own courage. Find your own garden.